All right. Well, good evening and welcome to Thursday Night Live. I am Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling at the Derryfield School in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'm also the College Admission Program Advisor at Making Caring Common at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And while we do not have any comedy skits or anything like that for you tonight, we do have three amazing panelists who I'm going to introduce in a second. But what I want to begin with is just to tell you that tonight is being recorded, and we prefer that people not make their own recording, but we will record this and we'll send that out tomorrow as a follow-up. And we're going to use the chat function that I see some of you are already using to ask questions, and I'll try to monitor that. And we have a couple questions that people send in ahead of time. So we'll get to all of that. For some reason, you've all heard of the Zoom bombing and everything like that. If for some reason we have any technical difficulties, we'll shut things down and we'll be in touch afterwards. So I think that's it. Those are all the disclaimers. We hope this will be a lively discussion with some straight talk about college admission, and the hope is that this will be something that covers kind of college admission in general. I imagine people will have questions about the current situation with COVID-19 and how that's affecting things, but we're also going to try to make it a larger discussion. So welcome all. I'm going to read these introductions because there's a lot here because we have some amazing experience in the room. I will begin with Don Bishop. Don Bishop is the Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Enrollment at the University of Notre Dame. He started his career in admission to Notre Dame in 1977. He has since held senior enrollment leadership roles at 4 schools, which included Cornell University School of Hotel Administration and Creighton University, before he returned to Notre Dame in 2010. Now, stay with me here. Because maybe this is a little comedy. So we're going to test you and see if your brain's still working after the whole day in front of a computer. Don is trained as an economist, and he is often quoted for his stance that he uses numbers to prove that most people overuse numbers in making key decisions, and he has the numbers to prove to people that they need to use numbers less to make those decisions. All right, you'll be quizzed on this later. Welcome, Don. Next is Jim Bock. Jim serves as the Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. He has over 25 years of experience in highly selective admission. Prior to joining Swarthmore as Assistant Dean of Admission in 1995, he worked at the University of Virginia's Darden Graduate School of Business and at Connecticut College. He has served as a member of the College Board Regional Council and College and University Resource Committee of the International Baccalaureate Organization, and he currently serves on the executive board of the Character Collaborative. Welcome, Jim. And next, and certainly not last, we have Ronné Patrick Turner, and she serves as the Vice Provost for Admission and Financial Aid at Washington University in St. Louis, and has done that since July 2016. Prior to WashU, Ronné served for nearly 15 years at Northeastern University in Boston, leading undergraduate admission and enrollment for the university's 7 colleges. Prior to Northeastern, Ronné worked for more than a decade in admissions at the University of Maryland, College Park, and she began her admission career at her alma mater, Johns Hopkins University. She is actively engaged nationally in the admission enrollment organization and currently serves on the Board of Trustees of the College Board. Welcome all. Thank you for being here. So obviously there's a lot of uncertainty happening right now in the world and certainly in college admission. But what I'd like to start with, and this is something that I try to kind of focus on with my work with students and parents at Derryfield and elsewhere, that there are some, to kind of cut through the hype and the myths and all of that around college admission, and to focus on what the truths are in college admission. And so maybe, Jim, do you want to start? I'm going to put this question to all three of you. What is one truth about college admission?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and it's always hard to narrow it down to one, particularly with an admissions person. But again, I want to say thanks, Brennan, and hope that all the families are safe and healthy. And we appreciate you tuning in this evening. And the first thing that popped in my mind is that we care. What I mean by that is it can seem so competitive that, you know, will I get into college? How can I afford it? But I don't know an admissions officer who got in this profession who didn't care about students a great deal and helping them find the best fit. I care less where they go than that they go. But I guess tying that to one piece that is true is that I've never admitted someone who didn't apply. And what I mean by that is I almost didn't apply to my alma mater. I knew I couldn't get in and I knew I couldn't afford it. And in the end, Swarthmore ended up being the only school I could afford to attend, even though it was 1,600 miles away from where I grew up. So again, this is not an advocacy for more applications, but it's about understanding the process, learning about it. But again, I've never admitted a student who didn't apply.
Great point. Thanks. Ronné, do you want to go next? Oh, you're still muted. Just one second.
Yes, well, I'm happy to go next. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. And just like Jim, I know that this is an incredibly challenging time for all of us. And I worry so much about how our students are doing, not only graduating seniors, but those of you who are currently in high school. And you know, the only thing that I would say is that everybody is experiencing some disruption, and colleges and universities, we all understand that, and we want to do whatever we can to help you through this process as you're thinking about your next step. So that picks up a little bit on Jim's message of that we care, because we really do. I think for me, when I think about one of the truths in college admissions that I don't think that students really realize is that you're the center of it, and you have a lot of, I'm going to use the word power. Maybe it's not the correct word, but you have a lot of power in this process, and it comes from you taking the time to figure out who you are, what you want, and to identify institutions that you think will meet your particular needs. Yes, we are responsible for admitting students to the university, but you have lots of choices. And I often think that students and sometimes parents forget that you have choices, and there are a lot of them out there. And with great support and counseling, hopefully you will find your match.
That's a great point. Thanks. All right, Don, what do you got?
Great. Well, a couple things. First of all, you know, I think when I watch what students do for the last 43 years, and I watched my own 3 children go through that as well, you know, I think that there is so much anxiety about the college process that I worry that kids lose their high school career thinking about college and getting into college. Yeah. And my greatest encouragement to you is make sure that you're using your high school years to be in that time and space, and to use that time extremely well. I think you're going to be happier and more effective in the college search process if you stay focused on what you feel your talents are, if you understand your motivations for why you do what you do, and then think about your goals. So your talents, your motivation, and your goals, and stay focused on that, and don't waste any energy or time worried about, will I get into a college? That you can't control that, and you're wasting time and energy. I'm always impressed with the students that seem to be ready to play their own game rather than trying to figure out the game that they think we're all playing. How do I game and scheme to make you pick me? And then I don't want any of those. What I want are people that play their own game. So what's your own sense of talent? What are your goals? How do you set your motivations? And then go out there, and I think you'll be happier and more effective in picking your colleges if you just don't worry about projecting yourself as an image. Just be who you are, but make sure you spend your high school years becoming who you want to be and not worried about how that's going to be judged by the colleges.
That's a great point. Thanks. And it kind of leads into the next question. And this is just one other question I want to ask to kind of kick things off, and then we'll get to some of the questions in the chat. And that is this kind of idea that you touched on, Don. You know, you can't necessarily control what colleges are going to do, and Ronné, you talked about it too. But you can control who you are, right? And one of the things that I think is being talked about more and more in the college admission process explicitly is this idea of character and how a student's character influences college admission. And I wonder if you could all just say a bit about how a student's character kind of shines through in applications, or how you use it in your review. Ronné, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think the character is really important, and I think it's becoming even more important in our college admissions processes. We find out a lot about a student's character. I think a lot from the recommendations that we read, and those recommendations can be incredibly important. And what your teachers, counselors, and others are writing can give us clues about a particular student's character. And that can be really important. Let me give you an example. At my institution, community is very important at my institution, and students who want to be within a collaborative community, who thrive in an environment where it's not about competition. Some people are motivated by competition. I am motivated. Mostly it's competition against myself, but we're looking for students who really like to be in a collaborative community and enjoy working with others and sharing with others. And we can get a real sense in a recommendation when the teacher says that Jerry is a wonderful student, very bright, but what I like more about Jerry is that if anybody asks a question, Jerry is the student that's out there and is going to help his classmates. That speaks volumes, and that's something that stands out in my particular application process. So character is important, and sometimes it's hard to get those clues, but recommendations can help.
That's great, thanks. Jim or Don, do you want to add to that at all? Oh, you're muted, Jim.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with everything Ronné said, and also essays. Often students tend to fall into descriptive essays, and what we want is a little bit of analysis. And so the analysis is showing that they're thinking, how they think, how they have changed, who they have become. And to Don's point, we care less what you do than why you do it. What are those motivations? What has brought you to where you are now? So we see that in recommendations, occasionally interviews. Not every school has interviews. And again, particularly when they're optional, again, most will not have had that opportunity, but we see it in essays, we see it in the recommendations. And you start to see themes across. So that's what it means to read holistically. So it's the transcripts are the most important, and that's a starting point, but not an ending point. And we build a file as we read. We also read in sort of a committee-based evaluation form where we're having a conversation back and forth. So what are we missing? What is the context? What is the family situation? So it's okay that someone worked as opposed to joined 3 clubs in high school, because that mattered to the family. And so again, that shows a sense of resiliency, character, and it's not about overcoming hardship. We're all going through hardship in our own ways right now, as an example, but how one then translates that in more of an analytical fashion than a descriptive fashion, I think can reveal character.
That's great, thanks.
Good, and Brennan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I have a son who's in Hollywood. He's a screenplay writer, director, and he writes movies. He has his own TV show. And I've given the same answer for 43 years, and he just chuckles and he goes, "Dad, what you're describing is how you write a movie. So when you write your essays, most students make the mistake that they write a report. And what they report on is their accomplishments. They list all of their accolades and their numbers. We're interested in what your motivation was to achieve whatever you achieved. And then what did you learn from doing that? And then how did that change you? So we want people who want to think, but we want them to think about things. We want them to adjust based upon what they've experienced. So being a reflective thinker, it's that depth of thought in your essay, showing that you experienced something, you thought through it, you came out of it on the other side with a perspective that now is what I might suggest is wisdom. And so basically I'm telling you to write an essay. What's your movie? What's your motivation? What did you go through? Pick something that you went through. What was your motivation for doing it? What did you learn from what you did? And how has it changed you? And by the way, if you do that well, you might want to go write movies. But generally, the story is your story. Don't try to come up with what we want. Decide who you are, and then make that as clear as you can without gaming it. Just be honest and authentic, and we can tell the difference.
That's great. Thanks.
Hey, Brennan,
Yeah.
I want to jump in just because I saw a comment that I think we can respond to in terms of how we can assess character. Someone said, can't you do that through interviews? And that is, yes, you can, but not all institutions provide interviews for the college admissions process. And so you need to just sort of think through that and be careful as you are searching colleges and understand what opportunities are offered.
That's a great point. Of course, this wants us to know when the Don Bishop movie is going to hit the Don Bishop story is going to hit theaters, right?
Yeah.
So here's a question. Jim says Jim Bock spoke about the importance of context, and it sounds like Common App we talked about this a little last week, but Common App is going to is exploring the idea of having a question specifically around COVID-19. And there's been a lot of other questions I've seen in here, and I've been asked by students about should they write their college essay about COVID-19 and how should they explain the context around their kind of hardships around this the virus. Can you comment on that? What your thoughts are on the college essay?
Right. We've already started to think about that. We expect to get a lot, and that's okay. But I think it goes back to what we've been talking about. It's less important what the subject is, but then how you write about it. So just listing what happened to you is descriptive. What makes it more important is, and then how did you come out the other end? Again, and realize these are 17-year-old students. This is going to be a huge event in everyone's life, particularly I think an informative event, particularly for sophomores and juniors looking forward to the college process. So again, we're okay if you write about it, but again, how did it impact you? Who are you as a different person? And I've started to process this, and I've come up with the 5 R's and just have dreamt this up, but I'm saying rest, read, reflect, reassess, repeat. So I'll say those again: rest, read, reflect, reassess, and repeat. So there's so much anxiety right now about how will you read transcripts? What about my essay? We need to take a break and reflect and rest and take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And again, we're all in this together, so we know transcripts won't look the same. Essays may have this as a common theme, but in that reflection, did you think about your motivations that Don talked about? If there's any silver lining, we're actually have an opportunity to take collective breath, which we haven't taken. I think the gap year is sort of the new summer. And so summer has come early in some sense. It's not. We're doing a lot of work. We're trying to get over the finish line with the spring semester, but we've got time to rest, read, reflect, and reassess. And again, you had this opportunity now to look at these colleges anew. And so that's a little slightly different answer to the question of the essay, but you're going to have lots to write about. Again, it's really going to be those motivations that pointed you in a different direction. And it's okay if you took care of the family. You don't have to invent something. You know, I think there's a lot of pressure. Take advantage of this free time to write the next Shakespearean sonnet. No, that's okay. Be 17. Rest, read, reflect.
And that's trademark pending.
We're working on it. No, I just literally came up with that today.
I like it. I like it. And I do want to come back to, you mentioned gap years, because I do want to come back to, there's been a lot of questions about gap years and deferrals and all that kind of stuff. So I do want to come back to that. But one thing, and this has been asked a bunch, and I don't know if Don or Renee, you want to talk about this, but if a student has had some kind of mental health struggle or thing like that, should they talk about that in an essay? Is that something that is a red flag for you? You know, how candid should a student be about a struggle, maybe with anxiety or with a eating disorder or whatever it might be? Do you see those in your review as kind of red flags, or is that something that is kind of all right to talk about in an essay?
You want me to start? Go ahead, Don.
No, go ahead, Ronné.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
Okay, Don.
Go ahead, Ronné.
Okay, I'm gonna go because we don't need to. We're playing a game right now. I think that that if a student, and I think it goes back to what Don has said and Jim has also said, is if the student feels like this struggle or this reality is something that is important to them and they want us to understand it, but they've also been able to analyze what has happened and how they've been able to manage and how they've moved forward, then certainly feel free to write an essay about that topic. But I think it's really important that the students speak with some other adults and think about more broadly, who am I and what's my story? And should I use this essay for the story to talk about anxiety or another mental health issue? Or should I add an addendum? You know, you just have to think about the application and think about which piece of the application you want to reflect yourself. It does not raise a red flag. We are not saying putting students in different categories because they identify as having anxiety. A lot of people have anxiety. My daughter has anxiety. It's you know, it's part of the world that we are in today. But what we want to do on our college campuses, if you self-disclose something, we want to make sure that we put you in touch with folks so that you can have a conversation about whether or not our environment is the right environment for you and has the right supports for you. And I think that's the most important thing, that sometimes people feel they have to hide it, but then they don't have a conversation after they've made an admission decision to understand the institutional environment.
That's a great point. Thanks. And I've been actually, and the same goes with COVID-19 too. I've been in kind of advising students that, you know, use the other information section of the application or the additional information section to talk about maybe context and some of the stuff around COVID, or if you have had a struggle like that. But use the essay to really share something about you that they might not know otherwise, or that who you are, that story that you talked about, Don. Do you want to add?
I just would add, I like Ronné's answer. I would just add that make sure when you do bring it up that you finish it with how it increased your awareness and how it's made you stronger and better. Don't just say it happened, show how you've been able to use it well. And then I think the colleges will not only appreciate hearing it, but it gives us more confidence that we know, as Ronné was saying, how can we help you with that? Because we want to help students. That's why we're all in this. We're excited about doing that, but make sure that you don't just say, this is happening to me. That could cause some concern. It's more, this is what I faced, this is what I did, and this is how I've gained an insight over this. And it will always be part of me, but it's something I'm handling, and I want to I want to work with you guys on my next level of achievement. Now that I've gotten past this sense, it may always be with me, but I'm using it.
That's great. Thanks. So I do want to return to that question about the gap years and deferrals, because I know this is really kind of on a lot of people's minds. And obviously there's a lot not known about, are we going to be back on campuses in the fall? And there's been a lot in the media, and the answer really is, who knows, right? Who knows how this is all going to track? Can some of you, maybe Jim, if you want to start, but talk about any policies you have in terms of deferrals? And are you, one of the questions was, are you going to cap the number of deferrals you allow? And what do you think about people taking gap years next year, given some of the uncertainty?
Oh, it's an excellent question, and one we're getting daily now. And again, to your point, we don't have all the answers yet. And again, I don't want to speak for all colleges. And as you know, but again, I'll try to keep it broad-based. Many schools have a May 1 deadline. Some have pushed it back to June 1. So decisions need to happen around May or June 1. Those that allow or encourage gap years sometimes have the deadline and that gap year request at the same time. At Swarthmore, we have a May 1 deadline, but a June 1 request for deferral. So we have a month in between the time that you have to submit your deposit and make a deferral request. Now, having said that, we may or may not have an answer to all the questions of what fall will look like. And I think that's true for a lot of schools. So we want to let folks know as soon as we can, both for returning students as well as incoming students. Right now, I don't anticipate a cap, in the sense that we want to treat incoming students, because we feel this way, that they're part of the family, just like the returning students. So sophomores, rising juniors, rising seniors could choose to take a leave of absence, right? They could do online learning, they could come back to campus. There are any reasons why someone takes a leave of absence. Why might we not extend that same offer to incoming first years? So we're starting to see those requests increase. Typically, folks need a plan. What colleges are deciding is, does everyone need a plan, or is the plan dealing with COVID-19, right? So we don't have those answers yet, but what I would say is, pay close attention to the schools you're narrowing in on. One, be in touch and contact with them. Two, check their COVID-19 websites for updates, because that's where we post everything. And so schools will have usually an admitted site as well as prospective student site. But if you keep an eye on that, we will let you know as soon as the college knows. And that's my sense too from colleges. I've only heard of 1 or 2 schools that have a fall plan. And again, what I hear is that it's going to be May or June, so it's going to be a little bit. And so we anticipate those gap years to increase. And the last thing I'll mention, because I saw it listed in the questions too, how does that impact future classes? It could. I mean, I'll just be blunt. If we have a larger cohort that is deferred and they are now members of the class of 2025, it could impact others. Having said that, a lot of students may defer their study abroad option. So those spaces may come right back. So again, it's too early to tell how it really will impact the future of admissions. So I wouldn't worry too much down the line in terms of the future impact of admissions later, but in terms of the seniors this year, I think there'll be some flexibility, but again, you'll have to check with each college.
That's great.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump.
Go ahead, Ronné.
Yeah, go ahead, Ronné.
I just want to jump in really quickly and help people understand. Typically, when a college enables a student to defer their enrollment or take a gap year, it is with the understanding that that student is not enrolling and taking full-time courses at another institution. And I think that that distinction is really important, particularly during this time, as more and more students and families are thinking about the possibility of deferring their enrollment or gap year, and study abroad options might not be as available, or other work options might not be as available. And so they're trying to figure out, what would my student do? And it's important to understand that if a student is enrolling at another institution and taking credits, then we're not accepting those and are evaluating that applicant again. So just think about that and check in with the institutions that you are asking for a deferral about their policies.
Right. And if they're deferring because classes might not be on campus, what are they doing in that time, right? I mean, if there's not a lot going on and we're still sheltered in place, then there's not a lot to do. So maybe just best to stay and be doing whatever the rest of your class is doing at your enrolled school. So let's look at some of the other questions here. Well, actually, one question I wanted to ask, this is one that was sent in, and it's around course selection. So a lot of juniors right now are selecting their courses for next year. There's kind of this age-old question about when is it all right to drop a class, and what are colleges looking for? And one of the questions I get for, and I know some of you have engineering programs, if a student is intending on applying for an engineering program, is it all right to drop foreign language in their senior year? Do you really want all 5 of the core subjects in their senior year? Can maybe Don, do you want to say something about that kind of course selection? Any advice you have for students?
Yeah, we often tell the students it's not an arms race of taking everything, but take as much as you can handle, but make sure you've handled it exceptionally well. And there is kind of a range that we look at in rigor. So, we'll look at how many of the top classes did you take compared to the other applicants from your school. But we always put it within the environmental context of what you're doing at your school. And then we also have an appreciation for how strong your school is. Don't feel you have to take everything, but make sure you're challenging yourself, and don't overmatch your abilities, but do as much as you can so that you're really getting the best education you can, but also make sure that you have other time to do some of the other human things that a healthy high school junior and senior should do. It shouldn't all just be about your academics. So handle as much rigor as you can, but make sure that you handle it very well.
That's great. Jim or Renee, anything to add? This idea of kind of specializing more, or doubling up in a science or doubling up in a math and not taking history. Any thoughts on those?
I think part of it has to what schools are on your list, right? And so you'll need to ask those questions as the list narrows as you do the research over the summer, which is tougher because you can't visit. But I'll give you an example, true example. We had a current senior who was matriculated asking to drop math. Well, it's an advanced math class. The students wants to major in English and political science. And the reason they're dropping it is because they're volunteering at their local hospital during COVID-19. We approved that change. So again, situations change. That extra math class wasn't why the person got in or didn't get in. And they asked. They didn't just do it. They just said, listen, I'm having a hard time balancing my hours and I want to give back. Will this math class or lack of the math class affect my admission? We said no, right? So it was a conversation. We appreciated the student asking. We're getting the same questions about APs. Our local school district require students that are enrolled in AP classes to take the AP exams. They have now waived that requirement. That's fine. So we will support whatever the school district says or the high school says, whether that's pass fail, whether people stick with the AP curriculum but opt out of the exam. Here's a little known fact. AP exams are not technically required for college admission. What we look for is the rigorous curriculum, meaning AP, IB, honors, placement, right? Homeschool, whatever you do. So we care less technically what you get on the exams because most still take them after senior year. So it's more about placement and credit once you enroll at said institution, which faculties are trying to figure out now. But in terms of admission, as Don and Ronné have said, it's about that rigor, that expectation, less what you got on that AP exam. So if you opt out this spring, that's fine. So I'm sort of answering another question too, but it's all related. We're trying to release that pressure. And so do what you can, as Don said, to the best of your ability, and we will work with you.
That's great. And Ronné or Don, where are you all at your schools in terms of taking IB and AP credit for the coming year?
Well, I think that generally, again, we're just going to be flexible with this year. You know, for those of you who are juniors finishing up your junior, you'll be seniors. We're going to be flexible on the testing. We're going to be flexible on any of these traditional things. We're going to be flexible on the grades that you got in the spring of your junior year. You know, I hope to see fewer early action applicants. I'd like to see your performance if you're back in school. So I don't know that I'll see fewer early action applications, but we'll probably be encouraging most kids that if you feel your best work is in front of you, don't apply early. Let us see some of that best work. So I would expect to see fewer early action, early decision applicants at some of the colleges. But on the testing as well as the courses you take, just do the best you can in the circumstances you are. Explain what circumstances you had, what decisions you made. And just as Jim said, I think it's wonderful if a student says, gee, I'm not going to take this 5th AP. I'm going to do volunteer work at the hospital. And I can only do that in the afternoon at a time when I'm taking less curriculum. Just explain that. Again, what was your motivation for what you did? Those are good motivations. It shows your character and kind of your priorities, and then you stand out. So, you know, we're going to be flexible on all this, that we're not going to judge things against this year's applicant pool. We're going to judge it against the same kids that are going through the same things that you are.
That's a great point. There's been a number of questions, and because you brought it up, about early decision and early action. And Jim and Ronné, do you have any thoughts on how that might change? Have you heard among colleagues that people are considering changing their early action deadlines or policies, or you know, do you anticipate different numbers coming in next year? Any thoughts on that, Ronné?
It's really hard to have that information right now, given that this entire situation is so fluid. But I think the one thing that I can say, and we can promise students, is that depending upon what happens, we're going to be flexible. We're going to have to be flexible. It may not be reasonable to stick to a November 1 early decision or early action deadline if schools are just starting up in October. I mean, it's just, and even if schools are starting up in September, I am concerned about how students and teachers will be transitioning back into the school system and ensuring that the learning or catching up, maybe in some cases, on the learning that was supposed to happen at the end of the spring semester. Students may or may not have the opportunity to visit colleges over the summer to even begin to narrow down their choices. And so we're going to take all of that in mind. Some of us are going to move faster than others to make decisions about changes, but this situation is ultimately going to call for all of us in the college admissions world to be flexible, and the flexibility will depend upon the situation.
That's great. Thanks. And since you mentioned kind of narrowing down the list, this was a question that somebody asked earlier in the chat about how can students best kind of get a sense for a campus and a community given some of the challenges that we're facing now. Jim, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. No, it's really difficult. And again, we talked about, resting, reflecting. I know I don't want you to necessarily spend more time on the computer, but schools do have the virtual tour, so that those are sort of the obvious things. But something that may be less obvious is your friends who are supposed to be in college may be back home, not too far away. And so look to the upperclassmen who came before you that you respect, that you admire, not that you need to go to the same college, but say, hey, we're both from X high school. What is college like? What was it like to leave home to go from Massachusetts to Florida or to California or to Pennsylvania? What did you enjoy while you were there? I understand what you're dealing with now, right? We're all dealing with that. But look to the upperclassmen. They'll be flattered that you remember them and that you admired them, and just say, talk to me about what your search was like. So use the alumni from your own high school or your own region. Again, not everyone has been to college or has a parent that's been to college, obviously, but we probably all know friends in our respective areas. And if we don't, talk to your counselors. They may connect you with folks. So to have those one-on-one conversations, in addition to the virtual tours and the online stuff. Again, I think what students appreciate is finding the beginning of the information from our websites, but again, they are meant to have a marketing touch to them and show the best sides, and we think all sides, but we also want you to talk to current students. And I think many schools are moving to online virtual tours. So talking to the current students, whether they're from your hometown or not, is another good way to do that. And I will say, before the significant social distancing and the masks and everything, I'd be walking around in town and people know what I do. And they're like, oh, I'm sure it's difficult. No one's visiting. But it was amazing how many of them said, who are more my generation, I never visited the college I attended. So I think this is still a relatively new phenomenon that, quote, everyone visits colleges. In fact, most don't. There is privilege to actually visit a range or more than 3 or 4 schools. Most still attend very close to home if they attend at all. So that there is something lost to that. I hope in the not too distant future, folks will be able to come back and visit several colleges. Last thing I'll say is start locally, think broadly. So when things do reopen up, visit your local state school or local parochial school, women's college, whatever it might be, just to get a sense of what it's like to be on a campus, even though it may not be the one you had intended to visit over the summer or this spring.
That's a great point. And one thing we've been telling students is to really utilize things like LinkedIn and get on LinkedIn and find folks who have been either from their high school, because I think more and more college students are now utilizing that as they go into the job market. And so it has their school affiliation and they can connect that way. So that's a good way to do it as well.
Yeah, the chances are by the time you are picking your college, if you're a junior, you will have had the chance to go to the schools that admitted you and make your final decision. So I don't think you're going to be in the situation this time next year, if you're a junior, that you haven't seen your final choices. For the seniors right now, you don't get to go back and reaffirm and reconfirm that. And so I think what Jim said is exactly right. Try to find students, even young or any alumni from those schools, and talk to them. But if you're a junior, you should probably expect that you're going to be able to do your victory lap on your admitted colleges next spring.
That's a great point. Ronné, did you want to add something? Yeah.
No, I wanted to clarify something. I see a comment on the chat that I need to clarify. I think I scared some people when I was talking about deferral and gap year. If you take a gap year, a true gap year, where you're not enrolled and taking credit at another institution, that's what a gap year is. But if you actually enroll at another institution and take a lot of credit, then we start to consider you a transfer student, and that is when we evaluate. We will reevaluate your application.
Thanks for
So if you,
clearing
thank
that
you.
up. Yeah. So since we're talking about campus visits, there's also a question on there about demonstrated interest, right? And how schools are using a student's demonstrated interest to factor into admission. And some of those ways of demonstrating interest are obviously visiting campus, are, for schools to interview, doing that, meeting with college admission officers when they come to your high school, if they do, going to college fairs that aren't happening this spring. Any thoughts on whether or not in your offices you will be using demonstrated interest, and how you use that and how that will change? Don, do you want to?
Yeah, I think Notre Dame, we view ourselves as being an extremely mission-focused institution. So we have always, and I think as the pool's gotten better and better, I always say to our faculty and alumni, not only are we more selective, we're more on mission in that selection because we can afford to. So, I don't look at it as how much interest do you have, will you promise to come? I'm much more interested is, do you honestly know who we are and what we're going to try to do with you, to you, for you, and how are you going to respond? I always tell our staff, pick the students that are going to use the resources at Notre Dame in the way we want our resources used, who will use them the most actively and get the most out of them. But at the end, who will do with this degree what we want Notre Dame graduates to do? So it's not, will you come? We're all three of our schools are very famous, very prestigious. So we know that you're attracted because of that. We're not. We're trying to get attracted to you and attract you if you are one of us. Are you really going to use us better than another student who has your same numbers or even a little higher or a little lower numbers? But how are you going to, if you could tell WashU or Swarthmore or Notre Dame what you think we are, and don't just repeat back to us what you've seen on our videos and our websites and our movies, or else it doesn't seem sincere. But do you get who we are and what we're going to try to do with you, and are you going to respond? That's demonstrated interest to me. Too much of demonstrated interest, students are actually hiring firms to interact with your college admissions to make sure they open up all of your things. They think we're counting all this. We're not. At the end, we read your essays, we read your personal statement, we read your letters of recommendation, and if we meet you, we remember our conversation. Are you going to be at our college in a way that we want you to be here? It doesn't matter how desperately you say you want to be here. It's what you're going to do with it.
That's a great point. Thanks.
If you think about the origins of demonstrated interest, the term probably started to come about when it became easier for students to submit a large number of applications electronically.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, we didn't know if students understood what our institutions were all about. And so taking the time to do that research and understand what we're about, I think that's an important part of demonstrated interest. And that's how that term, I guess, has evolved. But let us know that you are researching us and that you have questions and that you're interacting with us in some way. And you can do that right now, even virtually. Many of us have stood up a lot of virtual programming and activities, and participating in those is great, or reaching out to your admission officer is another way to explore and to find out information. But it is not 10 things and you automatically get in. There's no formula to demonstrated interest, because it is about that research.
Yeah, I like this idea of demonstrated engagement better than demonstrated.
Oh, I love that too. That's great.
And Brennan, I would just like to add one thing. I agree with everything my colleagues have said, though I will say we are a select group of schools that you've invited tonight, right? So there are many schools that are not represented here who do look at demonstrated interest. And I think that will increase. So again, just as we step back, again, I don't disagree with anything my colleagues said, but we represent certain institutions that don't utilize demonstrated interest in the way families have come to understand it. But I think that could increase. Time will tell. And I will even argue we don't look at demonstrated interest in terms of how many boxes they checked, but we have early decision. That's a sign of demonstrated interest.
Yeah.
So it kind of bothers me when it's like, oh, we don't have demonstrated interest. Sure we do. It's called early decision. It's called early action. Let's be honest with ourselves, right? So I own that. And so, but having said that, whether you're early or regular, we're not counting, did they come to the visit? Did they interview? Did they respond to every email solicitation? But some schools do, and some do because they have limited aid dollars that they want to leverage. So leveraging merit aid. And I did see a question about a parent about aid. Don't wait to ask for reconsideration, ask now, because what we don't need to do is get here and then decide you can't afford it, right? So ask for those reconsiderations before May 1st. It was about financial aid.
Yeah,
so I wanted to make sure we got
appeals,
that.
right?
Appeals.
Yeah. So
Hey,
you're, go ahead.
and Jim, we didn't all necessarily, I didn't say we didn't look at demonstrated interest at
Okay,
WashU. We
sorry.
do want students who have engaged with
Yes.
us because they know what we're about.
Right.
But I think the point is that you have to check with every single institution about how they consider demonstrated interest and what they consider.
Right. It's kind of that age-old admission question. It depends. Right?
Yeah.
And students should and families should ask that of schools and expect an honest answer about how they do view some of those things. Another thing I'd love to just talk a little bit about is and it came up here in the chat, is about international students and how you're kind of, given everything that's going on, how you're responding to some of the concerns and planning on campus for contingency plans and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, first of all, the concern is, will the embassies be open in time to process the students who need their I-20s? Fortunately, it appears at this point, we believe that many of the embassies may be open unless there is a reversion back in most of these countries. They should be open in time that within a 4 to 5 week cycle, they should be able to get their visas. And right now, we believe that there will be a priority and effort for those that are starting the visa process to give them enough time. But there will probably be a date sometime in the summer that we're going to all have to judge. Are the international students going to have enough time to come in the fall? If not, I think some colleges may offer them online offers or to come for second semester. Others won't. So you're going to have to talk to each college about that. I do think if you're a junior, we do not expect that you're going to be facing these issues next summer. But if you're a senior, try to, once you get your decision done, start working with the college and your embassy to get that visa processed.
That's great. Okay, so we're getting close to time here. And I do want to, and we can come back to some other questions if we have some time. But the one question I'd love for you all to answer as we kind of wrap up is, if you were to go back and do your college search over, if you were to go back and do this again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, or how would you, what would you tell students? Jim, do you want to start?
Sure. I did give this some thought, and this may sound, I don't mean to, I wouldn't change much because I listened to my mother. um, she said, Jim, what's one more application? You know, I may not be able to afford college, but we can afford $50 for one more common application. Again, Swarthmore fell off my list because I knew I couldn't get in, knew I couldn't afford it. And she encouraged me to apply. And she said, look, if you know they don't want you, they're not taking you. Get over yourself. I said, thanks, Mom. And then second, she said, you know what? If we can't afford it, you're not going. So let's find out. Again, thank you, Mom.
That's great. Thanks. Don?
Yeah, I think I would worry less. Kind of maybe my first statement at the whole start reflects kind of what I would do differently is that I was at a hyper competitive high school that paid a lot of attention to who got admitted where and who didn't. I think I would ignore all that and focus more on what do I really want and not worry about the ratings. And the other thing is, now that I'm an admissions dean, these ratings, I'm fascinated with how smart kids aren't very smart because they'll say, well, this school's ranked 6th. I really like the 9th school, but the school that's 6th is better. No, they're not really 6th and they're not really 9th. Those are fictions. And you're not wise enough to understand that. Well, now I am. So I worry less about the ratings. I might cluster a group of colleges together so there's a neighborhood of academic excellence and expectation on me. But boy, I sure wouldn't look at the ratings and pick number 5 over number 8 or discount number 13. Once you get a cluster, stop that nonsense and don't worry about it. Pick the place that you just relate to.
Amen. Thank you. And maybe just don't even look at the rankings to begin with.
Yeah.
Ronné?
Yeah, so I'm kind of with Jim. I don't think there's much that I would have changed about my process. I went to a good public school, but not very many people in my family had gone to college. My mother went to a small historically Black college, and my parents didn't know a whole lot about the college admissions process. Luckily, I had some great counseling, and I loved the place that I went and had a really wonderful experience. I might have applied to a few more schools, maybe one in California, but really, I ended up being very fortunate because of the school counselor who helped me navigate through that process. And so there really isn't very much. I wasn't overly anxious about the process, although I did cry when I got my first admit letter. But I had great support, but might have applied to a couple more places just to explore the world a little bit differently. But very happy with the whole process for me. But it was a different time. You all heard how long I've been in this business.
These days, every year seems like 10 years in terms of changes and new things going on. And but there is a lot that has stayed the same too. As we wrap up, any final thoughts that you want to give to parents or to students? I see Don, you're.
Yeah.
So,
we talk a lot. I think it's been a good conversation tonight, but I will finish this how I start all my talks to families when they come to Notre Dame. You're going to love college. College is a great adventure, not just academically, but just personally. And that journey from an 18-year-old to a 22-year-old, going away from home. I had to have a New Jersey roommate, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And at first that was so hard because he was from New Jersey. But at the end, 4 years later, he's best man at my wedding, godfather to my son. College is an adventure. You're going to love it. And wherever you go, don't worry about who admits you, who doesn't. Wherever you go, you're going to make that the adventure of your life, and you're going to love it. And the colleges will help you with it. But honestly, wherever you go, you're going to feel you picked the right college. as long as you make reasonable decisions when you're there, you're going to feel, God, that's the perfect place for me. So all this stress about where am I going, don't worry about that. Get more excited about you get to go do this. And you're going to have a lot of fun. You'll work a lot, but you'll never have so much fun working this hard.
It's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just, can I add one thing too?
Yeah.
Just advice, have vertical, not horizontal lists. People assume often that it's a numbers game, right? The stats, but back to Don, if I apply to more selective colleges, I'll probably get into one. Well, in fact, no. If all of them admit fewer than 10%, you have a 90% chance of not getting to any of them. So again, have vertical list, all really good choices for you that are less selective, moderately selective, and aspirationally selective. So again, it's okay, and you should have vertical list, and also talk to your parents as best as you can about affordability and what they may or may not be able to afford, given that's going to be even more of a new challenge now. But again, have vertical list and talk about affordability.
And listen to your mom.
Listen to your mom.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. Next week, this time, same bat channel, Mark Hatch from Colorado College will be with us, and Whitney Soul from Bowdoin College will be with us, and Mary Wagner from the University of South Carolina. Will all be joining us.
That'll be a great panel.
More straight talk. Well, you've set the bar high, and we really appreciate all of you being with us tonight. And to all of you that joined us, thank you. And like I said, we are recording this, and we'll send it out, and you can share it with friends and family or whoever, your students. And have a great night and be well. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Be safe.